Hi, welcome to the Hidden Stone podcast. I'm Psyche.
Hi, I'm Jared.
And I'm Brandon.
Today we're going to be talking about active imagination, which is something that we talk about a lot in the Hidden Stone. And it's actually something that I run a class in the Hidden Stone, and it's led to some very, very interesting conversations about how we can go into our own unconscious to achieve deep inner healing and psychological transformation. Just to quickly summarize what active imagination is, although if you want a deeper rundown of the method, please feel free to join a class in the Hidden Stone. Active imagination is a technique that was developed by Carl Gustav Jung, and it essentially involves kind of doing like a lucid dreaming sort of method where you put yourself into a relaxed or hypnagogic state and then allow your imagination to freely flow. But instead of just watching the imagination go like you would in a normal daydream, you interact with the images and the characters or the scenes, etc., that come up. This can be a really, really, really insightful way of achieving psychological transformation and healing and engaging with parts of your own psychology that are represented in the form of the imagination. So, we're going to be talking about some of our own experiences with active imagination today. I don't know if either of you guys want to start or if you want me to start. I feel like I could talk kind of endlessly about this. So maybe I'll let one of you guys begin.
I could say a few words about it on my end. So Psyche got me in intact imagination about 7.5 months ago. I'm not saying the exact date, but yeah, December 23rd. I don't want to nerd out because
I'm not saying the exact date, but here's the exact date.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, Christmas Eve, I guess we could say that. So yeah, we met up. I started talking about a dream in our old group, and then we met up one on one. And then we just and Psyche offered like, "Hey, you can. This is active imagination. You want help with this?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So end up getting off work, hanging out, and then we end up getting on a phone call, and I'm going from there. But a lot of what I've done, especially the first time around, was very, very insightful into my own shadow and my own. I mean, I do active imagination with the concept of the functions in mind. So the Carl Jung's functions, um, and with being an NI-DOM, introverted, intuitive dominant, I have inferior extroverted sensory. So dealing with control and chaos is like a very unbalanced lifestyle in that sense. And the imbalance there is just absolutely extreme in all of my dreams. It doesn't matter which one. So there's always going to be some aspect of like an observer freak out. Um, so yeah, like we did another one later on in April 15th. And it's just going in and like observing my shadow and like integrating has done so much for me, but I'm getting well ahead of myself. Psyche, if you want to continue.
Sure. So yeah, we'll just spend a little bit of time talking about how we got into the method, and then we'll go into, actual experiences because I think that's definitely the most interesting for listeners. For myself, just to be as brief as I possibly can be, I was introduced to active imagination when I was very young. My dad is very, very interested in Jung, and I'm very, very, very fortunate to have been exposed to this method when I was like around 9 or 10. So I think I was like somewhere in like fourth or fifth grade. I was having a lot of I was really struggling mentally. I had a lot of issues in my childhood with my mental health. And my dad, who had previously kind of shown active imagination to friends and members of his family, he saw his daughter who was struggling and showed me this method, and he would guide me through my active imagination. And I mean, rapidly, it started to help me tremendously And so I'm about to be 23. So for, several years now, I've been using this method very, very regularly and going within myself in order to heal inner pain and heal, anxieties and fears and even just to gain deeper self-knowledge, even if nothing is necessarily wrong. It's been just tremendously, tremendously insightful. I truly don't know who I would be without this method. And I'm incredibly excited to be, telling other people about it now in the Hidden Stone because I credit this method for, a lot of the psychological transformation I've been able to achieve. Jared?
Yeah, so it's funny because I feel like I've heard about this method in a bunch of different like ways or whatever. So internal family systems. I'm really into near-death experiences, and so I would sometimes pretend like I was in the spirit world and like see all these representations and try to understand it. Just generally like my mind is very like lucid and like what I can see in my head is very like vivid. And so I would just like tinker with it and then realize that there might be some psychological benefit to it. It was only after like really talking to you guys that I figured I was like, I do that. I do that all the time. I had no idea there was a name to it. I thought I was just weird. So it was kind of cool to just like realize that this is like a real thing and not just like some weirdo thing that I was doing on my own. So maybe I kind of like discovered it by myself just on my own. And then like apparently these other people discovered it before me. So it was just validating, but also like, dang, I never had a unique thought in my life. I'd be down to share some experience if we're transitioning to that.
One thing I think that would be interesting to do, Jared, if you're interested, is if you've had it, because I was thinking just because Brendan was talking about this earlier. One thing we could start off with is maybe experiences that we've had with our own shadow integration in active imagination. Um, how do you feel about talking about that?
I'll expose my whole channel to you if you want me to. I had a freaky experience lately. I can get into it if you want.
Okay, who wants to start?
It's hyped up, so just let him go.
All right, let's
All
go,
right, all right.
Jared.
Okay, so Brennan in the server was just like, "Oh, I'm gonna do active imagination." I was like, "You know what? I haven't done like an intentional active imagination like in a while." So I was like, "Okay, sure, why not?" So I got into my bed. I was just thinking like, okay, let me just like relax, kind of like sink in to my subconscious or whatever. I was just letting my imagination flow. And then the first thing I thought of was like, oh, sinking in, going into the basement. I go into this basement in my mind, and I've never been here before, right? This is just completely new because I haven't started. I haven't done this regularly, and I see that there's a bunch of boxes with VHSs, and I pick up a VHS, and there's a label there. I start playing it in this TV, and there's memories of me, and like, okay, that's pretty cool. What's here to learn? I see a demonic figure to the left of me, just like staring at me out of the shadows of the bathroom. I was like, okay, that's kind of freaky. What is it? And I start looking at it. And what I do when I see these horrific figures in my mind, just like either in the dark or whatever, I just start to psychoanalyze it. I was like, okay, I'm not going to be scared of you because, like, whatever, I can draw you in my mind or I can, like, see you, whatever. But it had, like, blood red flat face, just like piercing blood eyes, like teeth all around it, and just like this bug like demon mushroom looking thing. It was disgusting. And it was in the bathroom, just sitting in the toilet. And so I was looking at it and I was like, okay, I went up to it, started like trying to like psychoanalyze it. But then all of a sudden, like as I sank deeper into my subconscious, I like started feeling like what I would actually feel if I was encountered by a demon like this. And I was starting to freak out. It was intense. I started like interacting with it and I realized that it ate flesh like in my mind. And I was like, shoot, like what's going on here? This guy's about to eat me or whatever. And once I got into this like really like vulnerable state, I started getting like punching in real life, like punching the air, kicking it, and like imagining like squishing it or like cutting its arms off and stuff. Like I got really hyperactivated. And then as I started talking to it more, I was like understanding like the whole point of this being is to consume flesh and to like go to the bathroom. I was like, what's going on? Like, what is this? And so as I started like talking to it, like I realized like my reaction to it was more than what it was doing to me. Like, yeah, it ate
Mm.
flesh or whatever. Yeah, it was like demonic, but it wasn't acting nearly as much as I was acting in reaction to it. And so I started like just to calm down and start asking like, why? Like, why are you like this? And then it started like telling me, its story, and I got very upset. And then
Mm.
this man called me from above, and like it said, like, hey, get out of the basement. And so I went up, and I don't really remember the man so much. I just felt a general feeling of like, oh, just go back down and just tell it to leave the bathroom. I was like, okay, cool. I told it to leave, it left. And then all of a sudden it just like collapsed on the floor, like lifeless, like it gave up living. And it started to transform as it was saying that like I don't just eat flesh, like I just want to eat. And it started to like ooze out its skin, and it started to look like a naked version of myself, which this would have been the
Mm.
second time that I've had a similar image, actually. And like as it started to come out, it's like I don't want to hurt anyone. I just want to make sure that I'm well fed. And then it started to connect with a bunch of like food and scarcity that I had as an
Whoa.
immigrant, like my parents coming in, and like we didn't have a lot of things, and I'm just realizing like, oh shoot, there's like a big thing here. And I give it a hug. I like started reconciling a little bit with like, man, there's like this monster that I demonize, and I like beat myself up for because like I overeat or binge eat sometimes, and then I see it as a demon, but in reality, it's just I think it became the demon just so it would attract my attention.
Mm.
And yeah, and so I started to my therapist about this, and recounting it, and helped me realize like, oh shoot, this is linked to a bunch of other things that I need to be more mindful of and aware of. But yeah, it was just interesting how I was able to have like a deep psychological healing by kind of confronting this thing that was like incredibly scary within my soul.
Mm.
So yeah, that was my
Mm.
experience lately.
Wow. I just wanna like on to that really quickly. Because well, first of all, thank you for sharing that because I know that sharing this kind of thing is always super vulnerable and we're all doing it, but still, um, I just was I you got to the core of what active imagination often is really about. And it's often like it's not always like this, granted, but oftentimes you are confronting something in your psyche that is quite horrifying a lot of the time. Like so I mean I'll talk more about my experiences later, but like I'll have times where I go in and I'm having like an actual anxiety response because even though it's literally something that your unconscious has constructed, but still, you know, the shadow or some other kind of, highly repressed part of our unconscious, it often symbolizes itself as something very scary because we antagonize it. And part of the kind of test, of this work that we're doing within is, can you give love to the parts of yourself that are so terrifying, and you as like the kind of your own conscious mind is like deeply unsettled by. I just thought that I'm what the realizations you had were extremely insightful. And it's also just so interesting how the symbolism was so connected to this extremely complex experience of food insecurity that you had. And I just, yeah, I'm just like very moved by your description of that experience. The symbolism is just, oh, one quick thing just to nerd out really fast. Um, Jared, I'm sure you picked up on this, but Jung talks a lot about the basement as being the unconscious, symbolizes the unconscious, because he has a lot of he discusses, the psyche as a house in dreams and an active imagination. So as soon as you said basement, I was like, oh yeah, we're getting into it.
Yeah,
Wow.
I also take in there's this mystic Manuel Swedenborg that existed hundreds of years before Jung, and he basically said the same thing. Like the human spirit is organized into like these different levels, and the basement's just kind of
Hmm.
like. So I think there's a lot of connection between there, but that's for a different podcast episode.
That does sound interesting.
That is an interesting point, and I'll bring this up. Probably one of my favorite active imagination sessions I've ever done would have been where I did a regular active imagination. I have this mind castle, which essentially is how I like the barrier between how I interpret reality and my own actual unconscious and my own kind of introspection, stuff like that. But while I was there, I just did the regular thing, asked the questions, got the answers I needed, whatever. I do active imagination almost on a weekly basis now. But one thing I did want to do was do an active imagination within the active imagination. And when I went that low, it's very hard to keep myself in that state, but it was almost like I was in a basement. Like there was a real, like my unconscious to the unconscious. It was just deep, like inception almost. And things at that level got really, I would say, trippy in a lot of ways. But yeah, there is a point to say about different levels in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Brennan, did you want to talk about some of your experiences?
Yeah, so one of my regular active imagination sessions I do, other than just the regular mind castle, is this tunnel at my grandparents' land, which symbolizes a lot of like my shadow. It's almost where my shadow lives. And that's the reason I got into active imagination in the first place, was that tunnel kept showing up a lot, and like from my childhood dreams all the way up until I think the last one that I had in a regular dream was unintentional or unexplored was back in October. So as soon as I started getting that dream analysis, and whenever I go in there, it's like I run in and then see how far I can push myself and then immediately run out. So when I got into active imagination, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go in and I'm going to face whatever's in there. And it was oddly very, very difficult to actually keep myself in that tunnel, because I would immediately go somewhere else. I would go to like somewhere that is more controlling, more stabilized versus like the chaotic side of my life. But when I did get the handle on it and staying in the tunnel, a lot of what I was doing was these evil kind of demonic creatures, and I had this like blue sword on my side, and I just kept fighting and fighting and fighting them, which I could kill them all day long. But the second I just stopped and then met like the dragon or like that kind of boss of the evil creatures, I started talking, and like it immediately turned into this version of me where I aspire to be, what I want to be, like this father figure and this business owner and all of this stuff. And this is, keep in mind, this is like at the very, very early parts of the Hidden Stone. Like we didn't even have classes at this point. We didn't even do dream analysis. I did a little bit of data analysis here and there, but the server wasn't even up and running yet. And so the second I kind of just let him guide me, was the second that a lot of stuff started to make sense, where I started to become more calm with the external reality and a lot of chaos. I mean, back then, and this is the one thing that is different from my struggles now compared to pre-active imagination, is back then I would just run against the chaos. So like chaos would happen, I would just try to avoid it at all costs. Like now it's like, hey, there's chaos, let me go and control it, let me go and run towards it. And that's one thing that I'm working through right now, is like, yes, I'm dealing with the chaos, but I'm dealing with it in a very forceful way, rather back then I just completely avoided it. So I still have a lot of work to do on myself on that side, which developing your bottom function should not be easy. If it is easy, then you're mistyped. But that's a story for another day. But yeah, that's pretty much my kind of general, concept of active imagination and all my experiences with it.
Yeah, I remember when we were doing that, and well, I'll only talk about things that you already brought up, but like just the fact that, you were first addressing your shadow by trying to fight it off. And then I think we got to the place where it was like, okay, what if we don't try to fight it, but try to see what it has to say? That just seemed like that, and it was at that point where things seemed to really start going in a very productive direction.
Definitely. Out of curiosity, and there's really nothing that I haven't shared in that act of imagination that I haven't already. What stood out to you about that particular one, if you want to say something about it?
Oh, well, wait, okay. So I think the thing that stood out to me was the fact that, well, I mean, it was kind of along the lines of what I already said, in that it was very much a moment of like, okay, like you had been dealing with this tunnel for just so long. You kept on trying to fight through the tunnel, and you had never really been successful in getting through to the other side. Um, you kept on getting stuck in different places. Like there would be like mud, and there would be, like either, okay, you get past one point, but then you can't, there's too many things to fight off. It's too terrifying, etc. And then you, like you said, you kind of confronted like the final boss, quote unquote, um, of the tunnel being your shadow. And you had to, I mean, you had to confront so much internal chaos to get there, which I knew was quite agonizing for you. And it was, I think the thing that was just so profound about it to me was that, you know, I could see you learn that pushing and repressing, um, pushing away and repressing those parts of yourself, it's ultimately not conducive to that healing and transformation, because it really just creates a bigger and bigger monster. As soon as you start to give love and attention and understanding to a part of yourself that you've really demonized, that's when things really start to turn for the better. And I thought that like part of the thing that was really cool to see, because this was like only, your second like formal time doing active imagination with me, was that it was just cool to see that it seemed like you really understood that lesson after that experience. And I've seen you transform, since that. I mean, you seem so much more integrated. um and you're able to, like, I think part of what this method does is it really teaches people that you can confront your fears with love. And it just opens things up for profound transformation and being able to go far beyond what you were able to do before. And I feel like I've seen that in you, which is just extremely, extremely exciting to see. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for saying that. Do you want to talk about your insightful experiences with it, or?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely can. So, I mean, I've been trying to think about which ones to share, because there are just so many. Um, and I think that, okay, I'll talk about one that I had recently, actually. Um, and okay, so basically, I have, and what one I'll say really quickly is, like, one thing that has been my experience, I think, is probably a relatively common experience, is that your shadow, whatever your shadow is, will evolve over time. So I mean, I've seen my shadow in many different forms throughout the years. And also, I wouldn't even say that this thing that I'm about to describe is exactly a shadow, but more just kind of pain in general. So basically, I had an experience where, well, I won't like go in depth at all, but I've just been like, going through a relatively difficult time in my life recently. And I've been kind of realizing that I I kind of have historically had an issue with letting myself acknowledge that I am, really capable of feeling pain, and I'm human, and I do really value my resilience, but I can't confuse that with just, you know, repressing, the pain that's also there. And so basically, I had I had one experience where um, I I had one experience where my unconscious uses a lot of like ocean imagery. So I had one experience where I kind of saw myself, like an image of myself floating on the water. Um, and it was just, in the middle of this ocean. And I had a sword, like, through my heart, basically. And it was like my body, like, it was kind of implied that that version of myself was like dead, but could be, resurrected, I guess you could say. Um, and I mean, I guess this is this is maybe like a little bit dark, but I guess given the topic, it makes sense. Was that, I saw another version of myself, like, who was, stabbing her in the chest. And so I realized that, like, I pretty quickly realized that it symbolized how I was, hurting myself more by not letting myself actually have catharsis for painful experiences that I had. Especially because this other self was depicted in a way that I associate a lot with, kind of my own, I guess my own resilience, but an unhealthy form of it, where I take it too far and I don't let myself acknowledge that, there are things to process that are painful. And so what I did was, I finally went to this part of myself who had been, stabbed in the chest. And I was just really focused on trying to give her love and attention. And I realized that, like, I needed to let her speak, because she had been silenced by my own aversion to, truly acknowledging my own emotional vulnerability. Um, and so, I mean, oftentimes, like, what I do, we've kind of talked about this, is like, oftentimes what I'll do is it'll just look like me, giving her a hug or something like that, or giving a certain part of myself a hug and just saying, like, what can I do to help you? What can I do to make you feel heard and understood? Like, what is the pain that you have been trying to express? And that led to, a very, very, very cathartic experience. I hadn't I hadn't really, like, it was odd because for like a couple weeks didn't really I wasn't able to cry about certain things that, had happened. And I actually, I started crying a lot as a result of this. And I was just, like, kind of hugging myself and crying and releasing a lot of sadness and anger. And um, but the thing that was very cool was that, I was afraid that by, surrendering to this pain, I was afraid that it would kind of put me in a state of just, of a state of depression or something like that. But it didn't. In fact, like, I kind of started to see her transform and gain some more life. And, then I had a series of, other very elaborate kind of spiritual visionary type, experiences in this active imagination, where I actually felt really, really filled with gratitude and with strength. And I actually felt like so much more capable in being able to, like, truly, truly, truly give attention to and, um, embrace the fact that I have pain, but also still have profound gratitude and strength and resilience at the same time, and realizing that I can have both of those things together. And I feel like that's just been kind of that's been a general theme of my active imaginations throughout the years is, I'll find a part of myself. A lot of times what happens for me is like, I'll find a part of myself, like a younger version of myself or something, and she'll have some kind of pain that's elicited by an experience that was like, reminded that part of myself of some negative thing I had experienced at the time or something like that. And I just have to acknowledge what happened, and I have to let her release the pain in the ways that she needs to. And then I always kind of see this like almost alchemical process of that pain being transformed into psychological strength. So I mean, I can certainly talk more about this, but I don't, we'll have plenty of opportunities to go more in depth. But
Well, thanks for sharing. I obviously we're limited on time, but I mean, Jared, back to you. Well, what is I guess I could ask Psyche this, because Jared's just now getting into it. What is one of the oddest things you have seen with active imagination? I know that that's a very vague question, because there's a lot of weird stuff I've done with like getting passwords out of my head from like when I was a child. But what are some of the things you've done that have really brought kind of temporary or current help to you when you needed it?
mm, okay. Well, yeah, I certainly want to hear both of your answers to this. I think that hmm, I have to I have answers, but I'm trying to think about like what I have time to describe for today. Um, I think that the main thing is that it just provides really incredible clarity. So, I mean, I will be going throughout my day, just kind of, my mind constantly running, trying to analyze generally what is an emotional issue, or like an interpersonal issue or something like that, in a very, very hyper intellectual way. And, I'm staying in this very cerebral cycle of, just picking apart and just trying to you know, analyze in a very like strictly intellectual way what I'm experiencing internally. And that does work to an extent, but I find that it sometimes gets me in like a very, very, very frustrating thought loop. And so it actually lends to less clarity versus greater clarity. So active imagination, it plunges you into your own psychological depths. So you have to go into the emotional territory. You have to go into the memories. You have to go into the whatever is repressed. You have to confront the stuff that you don't want to confront on a conscious level. And that has always brought the most profound clarity and has opened things up between, my I guess you could say my heart and my mind. In terms of specific instances, I would say that I probably want to save some of that for another podcast episode. But one thing is that, I personally combine like, in recent months but actually for a long time have really combined active imagination with more kind of overt spiritual practices. And so that has led to some very interesting results where it'll be that there could be something that I'm really praying for, and it's almost as if I'm creating the conditions in which I'm ready to receive that, because I'm doing the inner work to heal, certain things that were blocking me. And so that's led to experiences where I've been able to um, be more receptive to good things that I've been, needing, but maybe wasn't ready to in one in one way. I guess I can maybe talk about that more another time just because I know we're limited. But yeah, I have had many experiences where there was like a very clear, almost like cause and effect relationship between me changing something on the deep unconscious level and it leading to things being much easier for me in my day-to-day life in one way or another.
Right. Jared, do you want to go? Because I have one final statement, but
Yeah. Oh, I to kind of build on Psyche's point, like it's interesting how after this there's almost a tangible effect. It almost feels like I was able to get my hands and like turn them inside out into my subconscious nervous system and actually like
Mhm.
move things around. Almost feels like internal psychological chiropractor or something like that, because it feels like I put something back into place, and then like the emotions or the thought patterns or whatever, like it flows much more smoothly after I have that. So it
Mhm.
almost feels like, when you process an emotion, it is releasing. It feels good. You don't feel that weight carrying around anymore. But when you process like the shadow and stuff, there's like something so deep that you just can't really do on a surface level. And so it just feels like I took a nerve and I moved it from one place into another orientation. And like there's no way I could do that like without like some invasive surgery. That's kind of how I feel. I don't know how to
Mm.
explain it, but it just feels like I did something good. And so, yeah.
Invasive surgery is such a good way of putting it.
yeah. One of the things I was going to bring up, and we'll probably have to get off here soon, but I've started developing my data analysis system and using it with active imagination because a lot of my memories will show up in the active imagination. And it's like, well, this day happened, I mean, like the September 16th active imagination, or the one about 2018, which happens to be Saturday, April 15th, 2023, which September 16th, 2028 or 2018 was on a Sunday, so pretty much the day before in that sense. But I started seeing those patterns. I'm like, oh well, if I'm being shown this here, and tomorrow's also a Sunday the 16th, but and then I go to another room and I'm literally seeing something from a month later on, and then it just continues to link and link and link in more of a metaphorical sense rather than like something that I'm actually seeing. So I have to go down deeper and deeper. And Psyche, that might be a podcast for you and I to do down the road, because
Mm.
I have kind of taught you how to do data analysis to a certain extent. So it'd be interesting to hear your input
That
on
could be.
that.
Hmm.
But yeah, any last thoughts?
I mean, we have like 8 minutes. I think like one, maybe we could spend a little bit of time just reflecting on how we feel like active imagination has changed our lives for the better. I don't know if either of you guys want to start, and then maybe I could finish off or something.
I guess I could go. I mean, this is how I kind of started it. So like the and I kind of like here's the entire like answer right here. Just blast it out. Um, Kind of going in depth a little bit more than I did earlier. A lot of the stuff I've done is just help me have better clarity dealing with my lower functions, dealing with patterns I can't really see on a conscious level. Because once I see those patterns, they're like, okay, well, I don't have to be scared here. Because all that subconscious, those patterns and emotions and everything will come to the surface, and I'll be terrified if there is a pattern I see in reality, but I'm not consciously processing it. So when I go in, I'm like, oh, that's why I'm scared. That's why I'm scared. How do I address that here rather than repeat the mistakes of the past that led me to all this pain? And to kind of
Mm.
it not like as a future predicting methodology, but purely like, hey, I'm seeing these same things happening all over again. History is repeating itself. How can I do better now than I did back then? And that's really, really what I've started turning active imagination in for myself, to be compared to what I started out with. Jared, do you want to go?
Yeah, I was actually just thinking like it's not necessarily it's kind of future prediction if you already know how you're going to act in certain situations. And so it's nice that active imagination kind of gives you that space to be able to like say, hey, I see this pattern of behavior that I do in these situations. So is there anything I can do differently, to prepare for that? And I think active imagination allows you to actually go deep into your psychology and kind of like rewrite the programming. I freaking software engineer talk here, but rewrite the programming of your mind so that next time you kind of unconsciously go into another situation like that, you're not beholden to your previous programming, that you can actually run a new program. So, as a software engineer, great, I can hack my mind and, update its, subconscious programming. But additionally, I feel like it's also allowed me to have greater receptivity to God. Because the way that I feel that God communicates through me is in visionary experiences. And I think personally, there's a distinction between active imagination and communication from God, which I don't want to like get into, but just being more comfortable with like the symbols of my mind and just kind of like being receptive to kind of like the more how would I say symbolic representative like way that the mind communicates to itself has allowed me to be more comfortable with kind of like the more symbolic nature of scripture or whatever. And along with Jordan Peterson and things like that, like I'm more open to not having such of a literalistic view of like scripture, which really allows me to kind of like walk in life while also like holding on to my faith and not feeling like both are in conflict.
I love that insight.
Just to add, because some Christians or other religious people might come in, listen to this, and hear us talk about demons and shadows and be like, "Oh, these people are doing witchcraft." I'm like, no, I've been in some witchcraft circles. This is not the same.
It's like, to be very clear, we're talking about psychological.
Yes,
this
is not
the unconscious.
Yes, this is not allowing demons to come in and possess our minds. This is just more like understanding. I really like Isaiah, just the idea that like there are exiles and there are people outcasts, and we demonize them, and then God, reprimands Israel for the demonization of the widows and the outcasts and the leprous. And this is a way to kind of reconcile that. There's a way to kind of take the scriptures and how it talks about Israel as a whole, and then apply it to ourselves individually. Who are, what parts of us are we, casting out of our society, and how would Jesus or God figure or whatever come in to those different parts and deal with that? So that's
Jared,
another deeper connection we can talk about.
We have to have a podcast episode on that.
Yeah,
we have to. I have so many thoughts.
That might be
I can share my video that I kind of like made about that in relation to scripture, and then we can also talk about it in another podcast, because there's a lot of
that would be very cool. That'd be very cool. Okay, I guess to wrap up, I mean, I'll say, I guess, because it sort of synthesizes a lot of what you both have said, is that I think that the greatest lesson of active imagination is it teaches you how to truly confront fear. I am a strong believer in the fact that, love is the opposite of fear. And oftentimes, like Jared was just saying, we have these parts of ourselves, and this does parallel to how we treat other people. We have these parts of ourselves that we determine are unacceptable for some reason. We have to outcast them. We have to exile them from the conscious mind. We can't accept these parts of who we are. And there might be reasons for that. I mean, it might be that we are recognizing that something is, awry morally, but at the same time, that's a part of who we are. And the way that, I think a lot of people believe that the way to have goodness within yourself, or the way to have goodness within a society or any system, is to reject and cast out that which is lesser, or that which is, deemed to be immoral or wrong or doesn't fit in with the system. And really, the way to transform anything that is, in any way deemed negative, is by giving it love, because at the core of something that is dysfunctional is pain and fear and suffering. And the way that you actually heal that rather than just repress and repress and repress is to give that part of yourself love, and to give, I guess when you, as above so below, when you expand this out to the collective, the same is true of how we treat other people, even if we have, some kind of moral objection or something to, however they live their life or something like that. So I think that it's a philosophy that is so powerful and so loving and so transformative. And this method allows us to live that within ourselves and apply it to the transformation of our own psyches. Um, so yeah, I guess those are my final thoughts. Anything else that people want to add?
We covered everything.
It was
Okay.
awesome talking with y'all.